understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is time for the podcast. This podcast has been inspired by a walk I took the other night down Dunleary Pier. Now, Dunleary Pier, as you'll know, is a very, very quiet place in the evenings. The sun is going down. It's sun going down the west, people fishing. Anyway, my usually tranquil evening stroll at around 10 o'clock was interrupted by the explosive sound, John. The explosive sound of a German band called Rammstein or Rammstein, depending on where you think. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Oh, I have,
They are
actually.
full-on kraut rock, kraut heavy metal.
But it's really, really good.
Well, if you listen, and was Lucy and I go for a walk, she goes, Dad, what's that? And there was a pyrotechnic sort of display coming up from the RDS. And the RDS must be about 6 or 7 miles from here, right?
Yeah.
And you could hear it like, and it was Du hast mich. And if you really want to hear Rammstein, just put Du hast mich, all right?
Du hast mich.
Exactly. It just
Du hast mich.
if you it's like if you imagine what Leipzig sounds like, it sounds like that. Okay, and Leipzig's quite a trendy place in East Germany, right? But it's got that German sense. And I was just thinking, the music industry comes in all sorts of bizarre, weird shapes and sizes. And what I love about the music industry is the fact that Rammstein can have their 10,000, 15,000 people in the RDS. The next day, there's Taylor Swift on her massive concert all over. Waterboys were playing last night. I was looking, there's music everywhere.
Over the weekend, last weekend, there was Pink playing.
Yep.
There was Pearl Jam playing on Saturday night. It was supposed to be a stonking gig.
Yep.
And of course, the Taylor Swift coming up.
And there's also the big Beyond the Pale gig just outside Dublin, the big festival Beyond the Pale.
Oh, right.
I
missed that
Glendalough. You know, so I mean, there's so much stuff going on, you know, and that's what I was saying. So we're going to talk about, John, the revival of vinyl. Why? Because I am looking at a Philips 944 3-in-1, a record player that my son took home from his flat. The only thing he brought home was his record player.
You know, I was rooting around in my mother's attic there a little while ago, and I came across this box. I think I was telling you this. And there was all this vinyl from...
All your vinyl?
All my vinyl from the 70s.
Wow.
And there was about 6 or 7 singles of T-Rex.
You were a big T-Rex fan.
T-Rex fan. And
that was very cool, actually, to be a T-Rex fan.
Yeah, and in fairness, it was my brother who kind of put me onto it. I was trying to figure out, did I buy those or did my brother buy them? It was either that or the Sweet Fox on the Run.
Sweet. You were a glam rocker.
I
John
was,
yeah. John, I didn't really...
I had platforms to beat the band.
Yeah, you did. For kick flares and platforms.
Love them. Yeah.
Sweet.
But then I came across the first album I ever bought, vinyl, which was, and I got terrible slagging for this at the time, but I still love it, ELO, A New World Record. Came out in 1976, so I was 9.
9 years old, John. Well, it's interesting you say. I will come back to you. I had a conversation with people who really know music.
Yeah.
They all love ELO.
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with Neil Hannon.
With Divine Comedy.
Yeah, and he was just saying, you know, ELO, like these guys could really write amazing music.
And the arrangements were amazing.
Yeah, they were. And
they're still relevant today.
And they are very still relevant today. And I never forget last train to London, being at, don't ask me why, club in Buenos Aires, Argentina, about 20 years ago. And a sort of massive club techno version of that.
Oh, really?
With sampling last night. It just sounded amazing. It just sounded really outstanding. Maybe somebody else has heard this techno version of Last Train to London. I don't know.
Have this really strong, because myself and Mac used to, you know, the typical young fellas into music, swapping records and stuff. But I have this really strong memory of me going over to you and you just got SLF. Inflammable materials,
stiff little fingers, yes.
And we kept playing Johnny Was over and over again.
What an original track. Bob Marley track.
Yes,
but made much better by
it was
by Ballysillon's finest. Ballysillon is
they gave it an edge.
It's the part of Belfast they came from. North Belfast. If you do like your Rough and Raw.
Yeah.
Stiff Little Fingers, always an extraordinary band. Always an extraordinary.
But here's the thing that now, I know I'm a bit of an audiophile, but there's always this ongoing debate about vinyl and the purists who go on about vinyl. It's the best quality and stuff. Do you know what? It's not. It's just different. The quality isn't better. It just sounds different. In the same way as tape sounds different. But vinyl has this kind of, it's warmer.
But it's also, it's a possession, right?
Yeah, oh yeah,
That's the key.
absolutely.
It's a possession, right? So what we're going to talk about now that we've gone from Rammstein to Stiff Little Fingers to ELO and all the way back again, Dún Laoghaire Pier, we're going to talk about the economics of vinyl in the context of the economics of the music industry. And the reason we're going to do this, you remember over the years we've talked about Joseph Schumpeter and the gales of creative destruction and the fact that when a new technology comes in, it totally and utterly upsets and disturbs an industry. The cars are thrown in the air and you see what happens and we move on. And I think no industry, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of my own personal experience, has been as affected by technology and by the Schumpeterian gales of creative destruction than the music industry, the way we listen to it, the way it's distributed, the way we experience it, the way in which people produce it, the way in which bands make money or don't make money at the moment, all that sort of stuff, the way in which major labels make money, the way in which Spotify does make money, all that sort of stuff. The music industry has been completely and utterly disrupted by technology. And what we want to do is we want to talk about something that we thought would have been killed by that disruption, which is vinyl. But no, it's on the way back. I'll give you a headline figure. 8 years ago, 300,000 records sold in the UK. And we're using the UK as a proxy because it's the big market and we've got all the data for it. And last year, 6 million vinyl records. So it's really on the increase. And why don't we go over to the UK and talk to a man, Graham Jones, who's written a book called The Vinyl Revival and the Shops That Made It Happen.
Actually, there was a documentary made of that as well.
Really?
Yeah.
So let's go over to the UK and talk to Graham. Graham, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Mac. Thanks for asking.
Not at all. Listen, that's a northern accent? Is that a Manc accent?
Well, it is. I've got a bit of a sort of chest infection at the moment, but I'm from Anfield originally. Went to Anfield School, so no doubt you can work out which in my blood.
Wow. A place I know well. In fact, it's a part of Liverpool that many listeners will regard as the Holy Grail. Tell us, Graham, actually, it's interesting. Why do you think, on the Liverpudlian idea, why do you think Scousers are so good at rock and roll and pop music in general?
It's that working class thing, isn't it? With Liverpool, it was very much that it was a port and that so many people would come from America and they'd bring the rock and roll music over. And I think you find that with all sorts of port cities, you normally find there's a real strength of music there and a good music heritage, whether that be, Newcastle, Glasgow, Liverpool, Belfast, Dublin, these are all places that have a strong music scene.
The production, the output from Liverpool itself has been extraordinary over the years. Better than their football output, but I can't say that too loud. Anyway, let us talk about vinyl, Graham. I'm looking at figures. I thought vinyl was dead. It's not. My son has just come home. He's left a flat in town. The only thing he brought home, and I'm looking at it now, is an old 3-in-1 stereo. So he's part of this new vinyl generation. So tell me what's going on.
Well, it's not just a vinyl generation, Mac. I mean, it goes right across the board. I mean, 3 years ago, my son, who was 23, wanted a record player for Christmas. My dad, who was 83, also asked for a record player for Christmas. And the last couple of years, my dad has gone round all the secondhand record shops where he lives and all the charity shops buying up Johnny Cash and Jim Reeves. I think the shops are delighted to actually see him because probably not too many other people are looking for that sort of stuff. And of course, my son's buying, anything sort of indie. So it goes right across the board. And sort of when the vinyl revival started, I thought it was people like me, middle-aged men who were sort of reliving their youth. Well, it's not been the case, and that's because, young bands and old bands have embraced the format. You speak to any band, and the one format they definitely want their product out is is on vinyl.
And is that because vinyl is regarded now as more authentic? Is it more personal? Just let's get into it, because I mean, and then I want to get into the history of vinyl, and I want to get the feel of vinyl, always the sense of having a record under your arm in the old days, and has that come back? That sense of old kind of almost proxy personality sort of stuff. But let's go back. Why are the young bands now so into vinyl?
Because it is such a really great format. You know, I mean, before that, you know, bands were putting out stuff on CD and just digitally. But when bands started putting out vinyl, young bands and upcoming bands were just getting 500 copies, 1,000 copies, and they were making it collectible amongst their own fan base. And, you know, we had something called Record Store Day that started back in 2008, which sort of revolutionized the whole vinyl situation. And ever since that, Record Store Day started, vinyl sales have gone up every year. Record shop numbers have gone up every year. And what it's done, you know, the combination of young bands and upcoming bands putting stuff out on vinyl, it's made collecting vinyl collectible again.
Well, I mean, we've noticed that just even around here, there's a new record shop has just opened up just up the road. And you can see that people are going in, buying vinyl. I can see that around Dublin, there's been a big increase in just record shops and outlets, you know, things that we thought had disappeared.
That's, by the way, that's Board and Brood at the end of York Road.
That's the name of the place.
That's the name of it. So they have a record shop element of it, a coffee shop, and a board game thing. Yes. So it's a real hive of activity. It's a brilliant place.
I should say, Mac, in the last 5 years, pre-COVID and after COVID, I've visited 43 record shop cafes, and 41 of them are still trading now. It is a real winning model. And people are thinking outside the box. I mean, I go to a record shop called Vinyl, and it's half vinyl and half wine.
Brilliant.
So you go in there, you sit down, they pour you a glass of wine, and you can play any secondhand record while you sit down, listen to it on the headphones. So you go in there and people are just sitting in chairs with headphones, listening to vinyl while drinking wine. I go to a shop called Pie and Vinyl, where you can sit down with a quality pie, and then you buy vinyl. You know,
it's so English,
perfect combinations, because who doesn't like food and vinyl, and who doesn't like drinking and vinyl?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're both John's. They're John's one-stop shops now for the rest of the thing. Pie and vinyl and vinyl. But let's go back to the history, because the record industry, the music industry, the way in which music is distributed, the way it's listened to, the way it's experienced, I'm find it difficult to find another industry, another way of life, actually, because music is a way of life for many people that has not been as changed as the music industry. I think it's the one that's experienced most change. So tell me the history of vinyl from its kind of heyday, I presume, in the 70s and 80s to I presume, those very dark days in the early 2000s, and what's happening now.
Yeah, well, I'll connect it a bit with my own story, Mark. I mean, when I started off, sort of working in the music industry, I worked in a factory that made the flavour for cheese and onion crisps, and you cannot just drop that in and explain to get away.
Only cheese and onion, no other flavours.
Well, no, I can't give you one other claim to fame, and I thought this would be on my tombstone, because I was the very first person ever to make the first batch of Worcester sauce flavour crisps. And Andy Warhol says everybody has 15 minutes of fame. I thought that would be the thing that I would be most famous for, as the first person to ever make the flavour for Worcester sauce.
I'm gonna do a sideline here, but amazingly, in the early 80s, when London was an extraordinary mecca for music, John and I would make a pilgrimage there, and John would be obsessed by the music and going to HMV and all these record shops. What really struck me first about going to England was the flavour of their crisps, because we never had all those flavours.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And now I have a man who fuses those two experiences together. This is a podcast, a legendary podcast. All right, Graham. So you're working in the factory, and then tell me what happens.
Well, first of all, when you're working in cheese and onion, you constantly smell of cheese and onion. And when you're a teenager and you'd meet a nice girl in a pub, And she'd say, "Can you smell cheese and onion?" And I'd go, "Yeah, that's me." It was a bit of a romance killer. So I thought I need to get into another industry that I really enjoy. And the only thing that I really loved other than sport was music. So I managed to get a job in a local record shop, and I started managing a couple of Liverpool bands. And when I joined the record shop, the manager said, "You buy one of every CD that comes out." So every CD that came out, we bought, and CDs were taking up more and more space in the shop. Vinyl was being short. The music industry were great because they managed to sell to the public that CDs were so far superior to vinyl. And I remember one day a guy came in and he brought me a CD back, and it was covered in food. And he said, "Can I have my money back?" And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, I'd heard that you could eat your dinner off a CD, and I bet my mate £10 that I could eat my dinner off the CD and it would still play. And I put it in the CD player and it wouldn't play. And so I'd like a refund." But that's how the industry had sold the CD was such a fantastic format. And it was the future of the industry.
And so tell me, so the CD clobbers vinyl in, let's say, from 1990, about late 80s, all the way through to the early 2000s. And then streaming comes in. And what does streaming do?
Well, just like the CD, streaming was killing vinyl. Again, streaming and downloading at the time, was incredibly fashionable, especially with students. It was, we can get music for free. And of course, the music industry itself made a complete and utter mess of the whole thing. And you had, companies like Napster and you had the music industry suing kids, suing grandparents, all these people who downloaded music. They were scoring the biggest own goal possible instead of actually embracing and taking it forward and working with these people. They tried to shut the whole thing down. And when eventually, Spotify came along, then the music industry in a way sold the family silver. Spotify got a fantastic deal. The artists not so. And it's still going on today. It's still a struggle for artists to get a decent income from the music, that they have streamed on.
We know all about that in this family because my daughter is a singer. So I know all about the ins and outs of the music industry and how difficult it is. But also, it's a creative industry. It's never easy. And you've got to try and do your thing. Now, speaking of creations, and so side by side with CDs, is the explosion in rave culture and house music and dance music. And of course, the reemergence of the DJ as a creature on the scene. So to what extent were DJs the kind of the keeper of the flame for vinyl for a period?
Well, for a while, in a way, they kept the format going with 12-inch singles, which are, incredibly popular. But again, the DJs would be carrying hundreds of records around with them to gigs and whatever. And soon as the opportunity to stream and download came along, a DJ just needed a computer, really. And again, that killed vinyl. And dance shops were a huge part of, sort of the record shop culture back in the 90s. But they were hit more than anybody. And, there's so few dance shops going now. I mean, my first book was called Last Shop Standing, Whatever Happened to Record Shops. And at the front, I listed the 500 plus record shops that had closed in a 5-year period in the UK. And when anybody looked at it, it was a real eye-opener because so many people go, "Oh, I remember that shop. I remember that shop." And then so many people would also go, "Well, yeah, we used to have a record shop in our town. Whatever happened to it?" Well, it closed because you weren't supporting it, really. And I suppose you can also say, the CD helped kill the record store as well, because what used to happen is the chart was compiled by record shops. So that's how the chart, that's how we got our top 30, our top 50. But the moment the music industry decided to include supermarkets in their chart figures, it killed chart sales for record shops, because the music industry realized that if you could get a big supermarket to put the CD right next to the till, they could get a number one on the strength of supermarket sales on its own. So all the marketing, all the budgets, all the free stock, all the promotional stock that used to go to record shops now went to supermarkets.
That's phenomenal, because I remember, and many people will remember, and again, it's coming back, of course, because we're going to talk about the resurgence of vinyl. But the record shop being an experience, right? It wasn't a place you went to buy something. It
was a
place
hub where you hung out.
You met people, you hung out, you asked the guy behind the guy or the girl behind will you play that single? Will you play that track? Will you play the third track on the SLF's new album? That's just, it was all that sort of thing. It was, the record shop was much more than a shop. It was a sort of a teenage experience that if you embraced it and if you engaged with it, it changed your life and it changed your set of friends and it changed the places you went out with, because the type of people who were attracted to it were all of kindred spirits. And it was all a case of we're these type of folks. Whereas I presume, I can't imagine sitting there in Tesco's going through a whole record, through your whole record in Dunnes Stores or Tesco's. Going through things. So tell me, Graham, tell me about the revival, because I love this idea that because economics is there's always this idea that, culture eventually reemerges. So economics can change industries. It can totally and utterly disrupt industries. The bottom line can be elevated as the most important thing for a while. But then this thing called humanity comes back into it, right? The idea of the experience, the idea of the vinyl being a nicer product, a nicer sense of music. When does vinyl begin to fight back?
Okay, well, Matt, the first thing I'd say is that independent record shops never gave up on vinyl. They were the ones that kept the format going. 2008, we had 700,000 units of vinyl sold in the UK, but last year it was just under 6 million. But it's independent record shops who never gave up on the format. And they were the ones who kept pressurizing record companies, asking them to put things out. And it was small labels that, in a way, kept the record shop going. And what I argue, really, is that independent record shops saved vinyl. Vinyl saved them. Well, of course, everybody else has cashed in on all the hard work that independent record shops have done. And although they're making a bit of a living, they'll be more likely to be holidaying in Bangor than Barbados.
Let's talk about this so in your book, you're talking about a slightly heroic person, the independent record shop owner. So let's talk about them and how they managed to weather this storm and where they are now and where the industry is now and where vinyl as a way of experiencing music is now.
Well, I love these people. They're great. What a job, when you've actually smelt of cheese and onion for a week. These days, I drive around the country, I listen to my favorite music, I visit record shops. And the great thing I always find about a record shop is that whenever you go in, you come out with something you didn't go in to buy in the first place. And
it's like going to Lidl.
Like Lidl. Well,
exactly.
That's a fantastic.
You go in to get a weekly shop, and you come out with a pair of skis.
That is perfect. That is, the record shops are the Lidl. I never thought that, but yes, they are. I'll see something cheap in the racks, or the owner will say, "If you listen to this, and I know you like that band, check these out," and that's very true. So yeah.
Graham, let's look at the numbers, the economics, because the UK is the third largest music market in the world, which is kind of phenomenal. Give me a sense of where music is in the UK. The UK, again, is by far and away our biggest influence when it comes to all sorts of popular culture. So explain to me what's going on in the UK, the numbers, just the sheer numbers in the music industry.
Okay, well, the most important figure for me is in 2008, we had 269 independent record shops in the UK. And today, we have 460. Now, to me, that is absolutely staggering. Who would have thought back then? I wrote the first book because I thought record shops were going to close down. So rather than being obituary to the record shop, the book actually became a sort of celebration. And the last chapter was called Hope. And in it, I wrote that if the music industry can embrace vinyl and give record shops exclusive product that you can only get in independent record shops, and I genuinely felt there was still a future for record shops. Well, to be fair to the industry, they've gone way over the top and provided so much special vinyl now for record shops. And that's why there's such a huge growth in record shops, really. And for me, that is the most important number.
So how much? So for example, how much is like to use the old parlance, a record now to buy, like a new pressed vinyl record?
Well, that's a really good question to ask, Matt, because a couple of years ago, Most records would be under £20, and that's a fair price. People can say, "Oh, well, that sounds really expensive," but albums back in the 80s were £2.99. So
Yeah.
There's no difference in that. But since Brexit, the price of vinyl has shot up. And you're looking really at paying £25 to £30 really, unless there's a heavy discount on it. So the price of vinyl in the last 2 years has really shot up. As I work in a record company, and it's so difficult to actually get stuff pressed, on time. The most fascinating thing is that 4 years ago, a record would have a release date, so you'd know the record is coming out on the 1st of July. Now a release date is an approximate. Hopefully it'll come out on the 1st of July. But, you can normally get the CD in for the 1st of July, but you can't always get the vinyl. And we probably have about 30% of our releases go back, and you keep putting them back because the problems and the delays, and it's held up at the border and we can't get it in. And of course, shipping to Ireland has become so much more difficult, so much more costly for the shops. And those costs have to be passed on. So unfortunately for the music industry, Brexit has been an absolute total disaster. I'm sure not the only industry to say that. Really.
I want to go down to the Brexit thing, but also, what we kind of forget is that vinyl is a synthetic oil-based product. And when the price of oil goes up, as it did after the Ukraine war, all these people, we kind of rarely put together the enormous jigsaw that are synthetic oil and rubber-based products. And when the base price goes up of everything, then you get a massive increase in the cost of the final product. But also the Brexit thing is bizarre because, again, I know the British bands who want to tour have to get visas now to play in Ireland, to play in Germany, to play in France. It's been a complete nightmare because, again, what Britain does, and I've always said does so well, is export popular culture. And one of the greatest parts of British soft power since I've been a lad has been music. That people went to the UK to find their music. There was this bedrock. So we started talking about Merseyside producing, all this extraordinary music. And again, Brexit's just the two fingers to that, which is kind of crazy. But we can leave it because we can get into Brexit all day. And then John will be freaking out about Brexit.
But actually, Graham, what is interesting when you talk about the price point of a record these days of £20 or even £30, you're not just buying music. There's the artwork and the liner notes and it's a whole experience. You were mentioning something earlier to me about Nick Mason. Tell us that again, Graham.
Yeah. Well, the last book, The Vinyl Revival, and the Shops that Made It Happen, got made into a film called The Vinyl Revival. And in it, he interviewed Nick Mason. And Nick Mason said that, he listens to all types of music, but listening to vinyl is like the Japanese tea ceremony, and listening to other formats of music it's like a tea bag. He said, and I drink tea with tea bags, but give me the Japanese tea ceremony any day.
John is now walking across here in a kimono as we speak. Little paper doors. John with his tea set. No, but if we come back to vinyl, the industry, etc., what this has proved is that you cannot destroy an experience. So when the bottom line was streaming, and of course streaming is huge, and I benefited from, we all do. We all stream, we all listen to music in a variety of different ways, but what it means is that even the bottom line cannot crush the experience. And it reemerges in places, probably the most unlikely places. And I'm sure record shops have reemerged in the most unlikely towns, Graham, in the UK.
Well, it's now a question of that people ask me all the time, where's the best place to open a record shop, and I've given loads of people advice, and it's incredibly charming. I had one not so long back, a shop called the Vinyl Van in Dorchester that's basically got a counter of a converted Volkswagen van, and they got in touch with me and said, "Great, we read the book, we've opened in Dorset," and you feel this incredible sense of responsibility to this shop. This shop must do well because they've invested everything because they read a line in a book that said Dorchester is desperately in need of a record shop.
Can I just ask you about live shows? Because any young artists I speak to now, or many, many young artists, what they are being encouraged by their managers, those that have managers, many don't have managers anymore, but those who have even a deal with a record company, again, pretty unusual these days. But they're encouraged all the time to like work on your live gig, have a set, make sure that that's basically your calling card. Is that the way forward for young artists now, to just gig and gig and gig and gig?
Well, I'd say, Mac, one of the things I'd say to any young artist is play your record shops. I mean, one thing that has changed between now and, say, 10 years ago is the amount of gigs that record shops put on. I mean, some of the big ones like Rough Trade have gigs every single day. And many record shops that I deal with have 2 or 3 in-store performances a week. A really good example was a couple of years ago, we had a young artist called Jade Bird who we were distributing a record for. And she said, I want to play as many gigs as possible, maybe 2 record shops a day. And we said, well, that's probably a bit much to try and fit in. Anyway, to give her due, she had a few gigs of the night. But in a week period, the week of the album coming out, she did 23 events and the album came in at number 10.
Wow.
That sort of shows, first of all, the power of a record shop. And the power of doing that, and I would encourage any band to play your record shop. I mean, I could probably think of 25, 30 record shops that hosted Ed Sheeran 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah, these people go on, to become big stars, and there's loads of people going around. I mean, I've met people who said, "Oh, I saw Muse in our local record shop." And
that would have been loud. That would have been that would have been Rammstein-esque.
well, I live in Devon, where Muse are from, and I suppose the reason I mention it is that I know the shop concerned, and they said, "Oh yeah, we probably must have had about 30 people." I seem to have met about 60 people in my local area who seem to be at that Muse gig that day.
That was like in Dublin. So U2 started in a place called the Dandelion Market, which has gone a long, long time. And they played a couple of, really iconic gigs there when they were young fellas. They were 18 or 19. And I think the capacity is about 200. And there's about 200,000 people claim to have seen them. There was more people claim to have seen U2 in the Dandelion Market than claimed their grandfathers fought in the GPO.
I like that, man. All I would say is the other way the market has worked for the artist is that for most of these gigs now, because these record shops are putting on so many events, that it's actually quite hard to get in. So they do it so that you buy a copy of the album and you get into the gig. And that works fantastic.
That's a really good way. Yeah.
Many customers that I sell to put our artists on, and they'll sell 100 units between CD and vinyl on any event really. And so yeah, that's it's great advice for any band. Embrace your local record shop, but if you're playing in a town, look for a record shop not in the same town, but in a town 15, 20 miles away that's on the way to going. And sort out a gig in there. There's so many people who do want to go out and see new music and do want to see live music. And if it's free or it's for the cost of a CD or cost of a vinyl, they're well happy to do it. Great
advice, I think, to young bands. Well, listen, this is an absolute pleasure. I mean, John and I could sit around talking about...
Yeah, we'll continue this on.
We will continue this on. We'll be over our Philips 944, 3-in-1. John will be hitting the record and the cassette. This is great. That was wonderful stuff. And again, it's a trip, both nostalgia and the future. Nostalgia and futurology in one gig. Cheers, Graham. That was wonderful.
An absolute pleasure. And don't forget to keep supporting your local independent record shop, Mac.
Absolutely.
When you talk to somebody who's just so into what they're doing, they're so enthusiastic. That was Graham Jones. He was brilliant.
Yeah,
he was absolutely brilliant.
And you can just also see that you can hear in someone's voice the commitment to the cause. And it's a cause. I mean, this is a campaign. And it's a campaign that seems to be, I wouldn't say winning, but fighting its corner.
But I love the way you referred to the heroic record shops that kept the whole thing going. But here's the thing that you were talking about before we talked to Graham, Schumpeter's Gales of Creative Destruction. I remember when I was working in the music industry as a recording engineer in the late 80s and early 90s, that was at the transition of analog to digital. And this was a huge deal. And that disrupted the recording part of the industry massively. So there was almost at that stage, the early 90s, along came kind of sequencers and samplers where, gone were the days almost overnight of, bands spending 3 months in a studio recording an album. And it was back to young fellas in their bedrooms making dance music. It's one of the reasons why dance music took off. And of course, they were relying so much on the older records and taking samples from them.
Yeah.
So actually what happened, the upshot of that was loads of recording studios closed down in London. And there was loads of engineers like myself kind of out freelancing.
Looking for a podcasting gig.
Well, that's when I kind of switched. But that was all part, and you were talking earlier about how technology has changed the music industry so much.
Completely. I mean, there's one last thing I'd like to say. It's not just the technology. What I'd be slightly worried about the music industry is the following, that all great culture requires new artists. And new artists, because they destroy the old, they bring the new, they bring a new attitude, they bring a new street vibe, they bring new popular culture. And what I'm worried about, and I've even seen it in the vinyl sales, right? Even if you look at the vinyl sales, I've got the UK vinyl artist charts 2023. Artist and title, of course, Taylor Swift is number one because she's number one already.
Yeah.
Second is Rolling Stones. Third is Lana Del Rey. Fourth is Taylor Swift again. Fifth is Fleetwood Mac. Sixth, Blur. Seventh, Pink Floyd, John, your band.
Yeah.
Eighth, Taylor Swift again. 9, Olivia Rodrigo. And 10, Lewis Capaldi. I think Olivia Rodrigo is the only artist there maybe under the age of 25. So
Lewis Capaldi's kind of young as well, isn't he?
he's
great.
He's quite young as well.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that if the record industry values old artists and pays like the back catalogue, right? Old artists more than new artists, what it's actually doing is it's destroying the font of creativity, which is the new. So this is something that I'm worried about. I'm not worried about it, but I think about.
Yeah.
That if you look at most industries, you take, for example, the biggest entertainment industry in the world, football, right? It's new players that people are looking for.
But you know the difference, though, between the old artists and the new artists is that the old artists had the time and were given and allowed the time they were invested in to develop. It was always, the first album will always sell because they're the songs you've been writing all your life. It was always the difficult second album.
Yeah.
And it was by the third album that you start coming into your own. That was always, you'd always get a 3-album deal. But young artists don't have that chance.
They don't have that chance. I just also think that the record industry wants to play it safe all the time. And safe is repetition. Because repetition, sells. So
because it's run by accountants and lawyers. It's the age-old thing that, people always complain about. The execs coming down in their suits, There's always, people have always complained about that.
But again, if this art form is over-dependent on people in their 60s and 70s, as we can see now, then I think the art form has a problem, and it's going to be disrupted by something else. I mean, there is going to be some new movement, as there always is. And the fantastic thing about it is that new movement may well come via these small record shops that are actually platforming smaller artists. But we wait and see. It might be it's the difficult second podcast, John.
Do you remember our band, Mac?
I do. Oh, Jesus.
We used to have a band called The Set.
Yeah. The Upset.
That would have been better.
We will talk to you about that another time. Talk to you later.